Hi, this is an experiment. I've got no idea what's going to happen. This is the first time I've done anything like this. Basically what I'm going to be doing is thinking about a UX related topic and trying to figure it out in real time. I really enjoy improvising, whether it's with music or with listening to people with UX research listening sessions and reacting to what they say and, guiding the conversation where it needs to go. So yeah, I'm going to give it a crack and see where we end up. It's probably going to be a little bit boring, and for that I apologize. I'll probably fast forward some sections and just show you the good bits, or I might not show it at all. Who knows? This could be a complete pile of junk. But I like to experiment. This is an experiment. Let's go. So actually, before I get started, a little bit about me. I've been working in the internet industry for like 22, 23 years. Started as a web designer back in 1996. And about 10 years ago, that turned into UX, user experience design, which was still heavily focused on interface design. And then a few years ago, made a more concerted effort to get into design research, UX research, whatever you want to call it. Understanding the problem. Speaking of problems, if this turns out well, I might start a YouTube channel. We'll call it Paul's Problem Space. My name's Paul Kotz. I can't even remember if I said that at the start. I should have. I'm going to have a sip of my coffee now. So the topic that I wanted to start with is something that I've been thinking about a lot for a few years through my work at Small Studio and then at Symbiote after that. I'll probably put a link to my CV or something in the bio or whatever it is, this YouTube thing. And research repositories, user research repositories. I'm not going to edit this out. As design researchers, we gather a stack of data. We get diary studies, notes on contextual observation, user interviews, surveys, lots of stuff. So we're going to tackle that. Research repositories. Put the words UX there. So now, why do we have these? Or why should we have these? Let me go over here. I shorten it to repos. Hopefully you can read this. Why do we have repos? Most basically, to store data we have invested in collecting. Because we're using up client budget or internal budget or whatever to do these interviews and have these sessions and workshops and usability testing. So it makes sense that we can put it somewhere instead of someone's personal computer here, there, in a PDF, in someone's email trail. So that's the number one reason, is to just have somewhere to put it. And should have got a wireless mic. I guess another reason to have repositories is to access data past projects. Yeah, to access data from past projects to help with the project that we're working on now. When I was working with a number of departments at the Alfred Hospital in Melbourne, did in like 12 or so websites and touch screens and stuff, which was really, really interesting. But one of the things that I noticed is there was a lot of repetition. These units, the projects that the units had were being run by medical staff or administrative staff. They were not UX people or CX people or whatever. They were enthusiastic and they wanted to improve the digital services that they had. And they kept on asking the same questions over and over again, and whatever community engagement work they did tended to be following the same structures as what others had been doing. And it was likely that there would be a lot of the same answers and a lot of the same concepts coming up with this data gathering. So that was about 2014 that I realised, oh, there's got to be a way to avoid this repetition of work. And I found out later on that there are lots of other people thinking the same thing. So that's cool. The concept of here's all this past data, let's dip into it to help with our new project. And that is challenging because, let's write down some challenges, hey? Challenges. It's challenging because terminology that one group of people uses or one individual uses could be completely different to the terminology someone else uses. Terminology or taxonomy or whatever you want to call this, ontology. Varying taxonomy. Yeah, I could have labelled some things that I found interesting as delightful, or as nobody else in my organisation cares about the word delight. They'd be searching under positive experience or something. That's just a really rough example. Another challenge is varying or inconsistent. I'm going to get a lot of words wrong. I'm a little bit nervous. My brain's a bit fuzzy. It'll warm up. But if you're a real researcher as opposed to a person who does research, you're going to get pretty frustrated watching this. If you've got a psychology degree or a master's in ethnography, this is going to drive you crazy. So I apologise in advance. Varying and inconsistent content structure. Now, what I mean by content structure is reports. Reports traditionally have been the way that design researchers communicate their insights to project stakeholders. We did all this data gathering, we did all this analysis. Here is our report with our various journey maps, visualizations, and recommendations. And speaking from experience, I don't think any of my reports have had exactly the same structure. There have been a lot of efforts to try and template the structure, the language of an insight or a report, but each project is different. So it's hard to enforce a structure on a report. Hard to enforce a templated structure. Not only because projects are unique, but also because researchers are unique. And if you've ever worked in a large organisation and had something mandated from above or elsewhere telling you, hey, the way that you've worked for the past 5 years, you're going to have to change that. A lot of people that I've spoken to from the public service and from large organisations when I was doing my own research, and I should probably talk about that, they found that very frustrating, that I've been working this way and then suddenly, boom, here's another way to work. It builds up resentment, and chances are the quality of work, the quality of insights or content is not going to be as high because you've got resentful people working on it. So I think when you're working on your data repository, your research repository, there are some things that you're going to have to work around or work with. And I'm picking different colours arbitrarily. Why not? Actually, I think I'll avoid orange because it's going to be hard to read. So you've got to assume that data is going to be inconsistent. Just take that as a given. Another thing that I'll leap to is researchers probably don't have stacks of time. I had the good fortune of working on a project for Sydney Metro's Northwest Rail line. And I had a really healthy budget for that and was able to do on-site listening sessions throughout Sydney, near train stations, not on train stations, because they will, or Transport New South Wales will get you for that. And had lots of time to explore different techniques, got the jobs to be done, outcome-driven innovation happening on that, got some good results, but it was a rarity. It was really luxurious in comparison to other projects I've worked on. So another consideration is once the researchers got their report together and whatever, cool quotes are relevant to that report, they probably moved on to something else, and they're probably really rushed for time anyway. So I'm going to skip to the concept of metadata really quickly. Metadata is whatever supporting data would be attached to an insight or a quote or a report to give a bit more context, to allow for some automation of linking to other reports, insights, quotes. But if the number of fields that you need to input, number of metadata fields you need to input when you're chucking your stuff into this repository, if there are lots of those or they're in any way confusing, chances are your researcher's not going to do a very good job of putting that information in. So I would assume minimal to none. Yeah, if I was building my research repository, oh hey, I did make one, qualspotter.com. It's in alpha, it does work. If I was building that, yeah, your researcher is not going to bother every time, or they're going to do a half-assed job. It's just the reality. But maybe there's someone, let's draw a person here. Let's not draw a person, let's remove that person there. Let's put the person here. Maybe there's a role for someone to, like a librarian, manage these data, this data, these data, datums. So I add I add metadata. Yay for me. I've seen the role meta researcher. The DTA had one of those a year or so ago, 2 years ago. Oh, over 2 years ago. I'd be curious to know how that went. If anyone from the DTA happens to be watching this, please leave a comment below, like and subscribe. All right, what have we got? So we've got why we have repos. Here's something I was thinking about earlier. Why do we have data? Why do we collect this stuff in the first place? What comes to mind is to validate. Validation is, I guess, you're in the solution space rather than the problem space. You're like, well, we've done this thing, let's test it. Or we have this hypothesis, let's test that. I enjoy being in the problem space where we avoid making assumptions and then to validate. But of course, there is a point where you can't be discovering all the time. You've got to start with some kind of assumption. But I try and make that as non-binding or non-concrete as possible. To discover. Now, discovery is, I guess, finding new opportunities. To serve users. These are, when I say discover, finding opportunities to serve users, that's if it's completely new to you. So, you might be working on an app that does better payments for whatever. And you've got a bit of an idea of a journey map, what the user's going to be doing, do some online research, choose a service, compare prices, and then pay, or whatever. But we could also find some completely new things that we can build functionality for or add services to serve. This coffee's gone cold. I guess to validate, let's just add it below here. to back up or to add evidence for arguments. Arguments. And that is, I think we should do it this way. And here's the data that we got to back it up. So these are kind of related. Yeah, I think we should do it this way. Hey, yeah, it does, or oh no, it doesn't. What's happening in this user's world? Oh, it's all very interesting stuff. And yeah, I think we should do it this way. I'll keep those two separate for now. So when you're a researcher, so when do we collect data? When do we need data, actually? When do UX researchers need data? In my experience, that tends to be at the beginning of a project, when you're like tasked with, hey, we're going to make a web app for this client, for these users. What's going on in the users' lives that we can help with. So yeah, right at the start of a project. And yeah, I guess a project milestone. So a project milestone could be, adding a new feature or addressing a specific area of the business. For example, if you were a rail provider, you might want to focus on disruptions for a patch of work. And it could be at the beginning of a sprint. So this data could be discovery data, or it could be testing the performance of what already exists. So doing usability testing on the current website or app or whatever, or service. But we're also gathering data mid-production. Mostly usability. Testing. If you're working on your 2-week sprint or your month-long sprint, and before you commit this work to production, hopefully you're doing some usability testing on your new form design, whether it's in-person moderated testing or A/B testing, or using one of those unmoderated services. Apologies for the swallowing noises. I'm not going to bother editing those out. Okay. When else do researchers need data? Maybe you've been asked to justify something or explain yourself if like there's a Senate inquiry on the usability of your form. Let's say an example somebody tweeted about and it went crazy was someone had to manually enter the latitude and longitude of their address for like it was a Centrelink form or something. So if that decision was made to manually enter the latitude and longitude, then you would probably have to go back to your data, your reports, your quotes. If there's all this outrage about this decision, who knows? Like maybe the researcher found that in every single interview, the participant said, I really need to manually enter my location. It can't be an address because every single one of us lives really remotely or something. So they might have to, dig it up again. To explain decision Yep. So that's researchers. Let's assume that there are other people in an organisation that want to use this. So let's change colour. Who uses the repository? So we have our UX researcher. We might, let's put some roles down here and see and test them. So, product owner. Let's go right to the top, CEO. Or let's call them C-suite people. C-suite peeps. Would an engineer, developer, whatever, need to access the repository, like to dig in and find stuff? I don't think so. Would a Scrum Master or Delivery Manager or Project Manager need to? Maybe. I've been in plenty of scenarios where, at my last job, where the project manager and developers would get together and make UX decisions that were bad decisions, and with no data or examples to back up the argument. So, but if they had a repository and if they were smart, they could probably find data that suits their argument to force a decision. So let's call them annoying. No, let's not call them annoying. Others. Maybe we want to have, instead of a title, we'll just group them, give them a persona, as it was. Call them not arguers, justifiers. All right. Actually, we can probably... All right, yeah. All right, let's have justifiers. So we'll say discoverers and justifiers. So there are those who would look to the repository to learn, and there would be those who use the repository to get what they want. So that's justifiers, Scrum, product owner, CEO, dev, etc. That's, I briefly mentioned it, but there is a risk or a challenge here, and that is data can be misinterpreted. Interpreted by malevolent people. They're not malevolent, but I'm trying to be funny. Yeah. Let's say that, yeah, the CEO had this cool idea for how to communicate a price change for a sale or something. And everyone else in the organization knows it sucks. But the CEO digs into the repository, finds just what they need, and says, no, I insist, here is my proof. And then that would trigger a counter data search, and a lot of time is spent, a lot of budget spent, the CEO gets cranky, and depending on the politics of your organization, you might lose the battle anyway. So that's a challenge or a concern, or however you want to label it. All right. So we know why we have repositories. Actually, I'm going to add the word justify here. We don't know any of these things. I'm just making some suggestions. I have done a lot of interviews with people, with researchers over the years, and people from government and large organisations. So I do have some data, but there are lots of researchers out there. And there are lots of researchers with really deep, specific data science backgrounds who might have a lot more examples of, when we need data or something. But I'm just going to power on anyway. So some of this stuff I've thought about in the past, but this is these two types of users, your discoverers and your justifiers. This is new for me. This is quite exciting. And in the past, I've only really considered discoverers. And I wonder how often justifiers want this information. How often in the past has there been a need? How often has a CEO said, I want to find this information to back up my argument or to take to the board. And I don't want to ask the researchers to do it because it's top secret. I reckon it's a lot. And this, let's use orange. We haven't used orange yet. Let's use orange as a flag. This is a thing to ask the community. Ooh, this is worth it. Okay. I think it's maybe time to go into the life cycle or the journeys perhaps, or the main areas of focus for a repository. And I'm going to draw a little journey in red where there is, here's our database. I don't know why they have lines in them, but anyway. Here's our repo. Cool. Here is my researcher or person who does research. And I'm putting my information into here. Great. Here, so researcher, person who does research. Thanks to the reops team for coming up with that term. I'm not sure I like it as a person who's doesn't have a degree in anything other than graphic design from 1996. I'm uncomfortable calling myself a researcher, but I'm certainly more than a person that does research. Or yeah, maybe I'm an impostor. So we have our researcher entering the data. And here we have our discoverer. Discoverer. There has to be, if you know a better word for discoverer, put it in the comments. A justifier. And I'm going to give them a little cowboy hat to acknowledge the series Justified that my life partner loves. So there, let's give them little nets. They're looking for stuff. I'm using dotted lines to indicate they're not putting anything in there. They're trying to scoop something out. Cool. Researcher puts stuff in. Well, researcher with their little portable hard drive recorder thing. Researcher gathers data. And for the sake of simplicity, they're going to be doing listening sessions. They gather data. What do they do before they gather data? They plan. How do you do planning? With the process that I have been working to, research planning or research goal setting is usually done by the researcher, the product owner, and whatever stakeholders can make it. So it's at the planning stage that you decide or you agree on what's the information that we want to know. And hopefully it's not too specific, these questions. You know, we don't really want to know if we take a train example. Well, depending on how if we're at the project start, our research questions are probably quite broad, hopefully quite broad, so we can get the maximum amount of discovery, new, fresh insights. But at a project milestone, we might be asking some specific questions, but the important thing is that you've got to have research goals, a list of research goals. So I'm going to add goal setting just so. Another activity for research planning is what method are we going to use to gather the data to answer the questions that we need? Who's going to do the recruiting? What dates? All that kind of stuff. A lot of these things have been split up quite nicely in the 8 pillars of user research, which the research ops team have been working on for quite some time. So yeah, this is getting into what's all reops really, all the different things beyond just data gathering and analysis. Okay. We know what we want to know, gather the data, we analyze the data, and we put it in. And at this end, there are people getting stuff. That's not really a journey. It's just people getting stuff right now. So I need to redraw that. So let's redraw that. So let's redraw the whole thing. I'll call that research planning. Okay, now we split. Or, let's see here, data gathering. Data gathering, we have a lot of options available to us. Listening sessions. Google Analytics, traffic analysis stuff, combing through social media. There's my little bird, my Twitter bird. Diary studies, Dear Diary. And then we have this option of research, repository, looking. That's my little net. So let's say we've chosen listening sessions. We've done our analysis, sticky notes, and our report. And that goes into a repro. Cool. Now, this is the this is the user, the UX researcher. Great. Cool stuff. All right. So what are we going to call this? Search through existing data. Data mining. All right, data mining. Existing data mining. Pre-existing. All right, time to check to see if this is still recording. Hey, it still is. Great. Okay. Pre-existing data mining. We've gone to the repository. This is the big question. How are we best going to serve the researcher, or anyone for that matter, who's doing that bit? Actually, what am I doing? All right, it's not quite a question mark. Now I've done research on how researchers plan, how they gather data, how they analyze, and how they currently add stuff to a repository. When I did that, there weren't really repositories out there, or they were really, really expensive, or they were market research based as opposed to user research based. And I think a lot of people, particularly people who are trying to make money building research repositories, have thought a lot about this stuff and a little bit about, well, a lot about how to technically solve this bit. But I reckon that people haven't thought enough about the mindset of this researcher as they approach this task. So that's what maybe we can get a little bit further along today, maybe not. That's all. Maybe these are pain points, maybe these are just areas of interest. Adding to the repository. I have all this stuff, I've written it in a variety of formats. I have to now put it into the repository, conform to some sort of structure. It's really annoying. That's where a lot of improvement can be done, a lot of work and refinement can be done to make your repository better. So I had a hypothesis a while ago, and I wrote an article about it, and I'll chuck it in the link, I guess. Or a challenge is, if we can assume that the data is going to be inconsistent, and we can assume that minimal to no metadata exists because it's onerous to add, time consuming. All right. All right. Because it's time consuming to add, that's obviously something that can be addressed through the design of the data structure and the design of the UI for this phase of adding it. That's cool. That's a process of learning and listening to researchers and working that out. That shouldn't be a difficult task. And I know that there are lots of people working on very technically complex and clever ways to use machine learning or AI to automatically make sense of data and to make connections between insights, reports, whatever the content's going to be, quotes, and have that stuff magically appear, have relevant stuff magically appear when you enter search terms. And the opportunity there, I guess, is if you have a big enough data set, you could then supply, if you had a big enough data set and you had the permission to use people's data outside of the organization, then you could do queries on particular topics or journeys or whatever and sell that data. Which could be a good opportunity if you were a large organization. So, opportunities. I'm a bad writer. Yeah, I can imagine if you had enough data about commuter behaviour, it would be quite powerful. To say, from all this research that we've done over all of these years, we can tell you these 4 things. These immutable laws, rules of thumb. So, my big question. I think that the information that we need to know, like there is already work happening with this. Very smart people doing it. I sound like Donald Trump. Very smart people. Oh, let's just cancel that. Trying to link stuff up. I think what's going to influence that in a meaningful way, influence the data structure in a meaningful way, is to know what's going through the head. When tasked, when looking, when mining, this number one question for me. I've asked this question of researchers, and they all said, just search using keywords, tags. And when asked whether that was successful, they said no. Just because you get all sorts of stuff for reasons like this. Another challenge is quotes selected or flagged as important. Or insights, anything. Now these are like, when working on QualSpotter, we call them moments. We work, Thomas Sharon, call them nuggets, nuggets seems to be a bit of a, it's being adopted as a term. Side note, when the article was published by old mate Toma, that was the day before we were due to launch QualSpotter Alpha, and I read this and my heart sank. But at the same time, it was quite validating. Hey, there are really smart people working on the same stuff, but they got there first. Quotes and insights flagged as important may only be important or be so in specific contexts. Specific contexts. An example of that is for the Northwest Rail project. I interviewed a bunch of people, and I was interviewing them knowing that I was going to be working on a kiosk app and website. And so there were a lot of things that listening session participants told me that were outside of the area of control of these things. And the biggest example was a couple of participants who were doing it tough said that the ticket inspectors and the rail station staff looked down on them and made them feel kind of worthless, and they had this real sense of not feeling good enough, and it sort of went to an emotional place. And if you were designing the customer service area of the transport, then information like that is really useful. But for my project, it wasn't. And so I didn't use any of those quotes. I used other quotes by these participants, but the quotes around their treatment on stations, not useful. Incredibly useful for someone else. So our repository, when we're looking for stuff, our repository needs to find things that have not been flagged. So flagging something as interesting is not enough. We're going to add this to an assumption. Assume unflagged data is useful. Okay. So what do we need? What do we need to make this bit good? What do we need to make mining a delightful experience as opposed to a frustrating one? We need metadata structure that has few fields to manually input data. We need meaningful results. Now, maybe we should take that off. Well, what does the researcher need? Does the researcher really need a bunch of quotes? And when you've started a project, or if you've started a component of the project, what do you need to know? What do you need to know that pre-existing data is going to do better than listening sessions? Why is pre-existing data better or useful? Yeah, why bother? Like, yeah, we don't want to waste it. But what use is it? I think that's a very big question to ask our research community. Is it only useful in certain sample sizes? Sizes. So is this basically to support or to start creating quantitative data? Comes more quanti. Now, I wrote a research plan for another transport provider a couple of weeks ago, and the first question was, is there pre-existing research done? And the question I need to ask myself is, if the answer is yes, what do I want to get out of it? Another example is for this Northwest Metro project, the company Meld, like about a year beforehand, did a huge amount of research on the overall service to facilitate the overall service design, which they just won an award for. Congratulations. Had I had access to that data, if there weren't silos going on politically, what would I have done with that? How could I have made sense of that information? I do a fair bit of front-end development as part of my work. I'm what you call a generalist. And one of the things in that role is to read other people's code and to interpret what they're thinking, usually with minimal documentation to back it up. And so, looking at other people's data, there's going to be that same translation that you're doing in your head. Which is sort of related to this. Like, you can collect a whole bunch of stuff, but am I going to understand it? So what would I look for personally in my projects? Now, I would assume there would have to be some, I would assume that I have my research plan and I want to know how people set alarms in the morning, or their sort of wake up routine, how they value sleep and that sort of thing. And I work for a massive organisation that does, let's stick with transport because I know that. I might look for things that are around time management. So let's just create a little project here. Am I still recording? Yeah, still recording. Sweet. What is it? Ooh. Yes. I'm thinking about alarms. My project's around alarms. I have access to all this myriad of public transport data, including customer feedback. And I go to my repository. Call this alarm project. And I visit the repository. Hello, data repository. Tell me the answers. I have my little research plan. Am I just going to look for keywords? I'm just going to type in, give me any... All right. Show me reports. Give me individual insights or nuggets. And maybe just give me quotes, transcripts. So if I want to quote, I probably want a whole transcript. And give me projects. Give me research goals. If one of my research goals is we want to know how people wake up in the morning, and I go, hey repository, that's one of my research goals. Repository is going to find other research goals that might be related to, it picks the word morning and goes, hey, that's temporal, that's time-based. We're going to give you anything related to days, time, weeks. Wake up, that's related to sleep. Beds. So maybe it'll return, if we're looking for research goals, maybe it'll return stuff about how comfortable beds are. Maybe that's pretty useful, I don't know. Projects. Projects might be, if we search for, well, let's put our search query in there. One of our research goals. What do we want to know? How users set their alarm. for the morning. Set their alarm for any time. So we've got shift workers. If this is the start of the project, it might be how do users plan to wake up. This is more specific, so let's assume that we're redesigning our alarm. We're not discovering anything broader than that. So that's one of our research goals, how do users set their alarm? What do we want to know? So if we're looking for research goals, what might we find? Let's just make up some examples. Actually, first let's break up. We're going to get into some try-hard machine learning. How users, we're going to break up a goal. How users set their alarm. What have we got here? We have the word alarm. Now, alarm could return, alarm clock, phone alarm, fire alarm, burglar alarm. That's not going to be very useful. Let's make another assumption. This is a fine research goal if you're manually looking for or gathering your data this way. You know, everyone knows what's going on because they're humans. So let's assume that research goals are poorly written. This is not good for machine learning. Research. Your research goals, therefore, ergo, ipso facto, search queries. Poorly written. Poorly written sounds a bit mean. Written. My writing's shocking. Yeah, so alarm, this will give us, fire alarm, burglar. Fire, burglar, clock. Set. Set might give us it might give us like group collection, a set of things, or it could be set concrete, or it could be the verb to set. So yeah, this is a really bad query, and I don't think this is going to return much of value for any of these. So I think whatever machine learning that's going on, it's going to have to break this down into something useful. And if it's going to break it down into something useful, it has to be like so clever, like cleverer than Google is right now, or we have to enforce a structure on this query or enforce a structure on a research goal. So, what have I got? Where can I put that down? So yeah, what do we need? a consistent research goal structure. Or no, look, we need a consistent search query structure. Because some people aren't going to have research goals. Consistent search query structure that makes sense to the user, to the person doing searching, whether they're our justifier or our discoverer. So that means not having some hardcore regex, regular expression thing. It needs to be self-evident. As soon as the user sees the fields, they know exactly what to input, rather than one field, enter the tags. Refine this list by demographic, and so forth. So, how much time have we got? Still going, I think. I'm recording on my phone and okay. So we need to play with the search field. We need to experiment. We need to look at as many research goals as we can, find some sort of consistent structure, and apply that to this field, or these fields. So, the researcher's job is going to be much easier if they have a goal, or if they have goals, a list of things they want to know. If they don't have that, we need to communicate to them, hey, go back, figure out what you want to know, then structure it in this way. So if we can come up with a field, a search query, that with no explanation makes sense to the user, and then we have some super clever machine learning that searches through the raw data every word. So we have raw data, we have metadata, and then we have insights. So let's say a transcript is raw. It's just raw data. We haven't messed around with it. Insights, projects, goals, they're all contrived, for want of a better word. Not contrived. Curated, manually defined, created. Have to settle with something. Created, it's a bad word, but you know. Transcript is raw. a quote is chosen and therefore created. So can we assume, a quote is something that is chosen. I don't want to have to add the word chosen quote. Okay. So our deep learning, machine learning, AI, and needs to do all this ethically. I had it before, I've lost it. So a report, an insight, a quote, a project, and a research goal could potentially have metadata. So we'll call that a I want to call it curated. Created, all right. Created. This is going to have metadata. Whatever that structure is, whether it's demographics, date, whether it's related to a task, whether it's positive or negative. Let's just add some examples. And I know you metadata people hopefully have a much more sophisticated list, but remember, this list of metadata needs to be short enough that people can feasibly enter it. So, demographics, location, date, time of day, if they're talking about in the morning or whatever, positive or negative, etc. Whatever the researcher putting the stuff in is able to enter. Cool. And then, so the created has metadata and it has the content that is searched on. So that's the report. Text, the report is going to be inconsistent. So we can't split up that report into anything. And then raw. Would you add metadata to a transcript? It's just a conversation between a couple of people. No. I think you would add it to a quote. The amount of topics that you would cover, well, maybe you would have date and stuff. But your repository is going to be smart enough that if you've got a transcript that's attached to a project, you would have your dates and stuff. I'm not going to do a data schema for that. So let's just keep raw data as just the content itself. Okay. Now, I think what we need is a lot of examples of these things. We need to get enough examples of these created things to find commonalities. What's going through a researcher's mind when mining the repository And how much can we influence them? We direct their behavior. So in our service design or our UI design, the service design being, hey, staff of our organization, there's a new way of doing things and this is how you do it in terms of finding existing data or adding different data. How much can you do that? How much can our UI advise the user, hey, your search query needs to be this? How much do we need to explain explicitly? How much can just be done by having the field labels make sense? So I think if we can get examples of this stuff and find commonalities, if we can define a search query structure that can dig through this stuff and spit out something relevant, if we can test how much we can influence behavior at this step of the game, and if we can ask as many researchers as possible, hey, what's going through your mind when you've got your research goals, or if you haven't got your research goals, and you're standing in front of this massive wad of data? What's your expectations? What's your mental model, as it were? Why do you think pre-existing data is useful? Do you think that you're going to get individual quotes that support your argument or that reveal new insights? Or are you thinking, I just want to get some weight to my other research. I want enough numbers to say, hey, 50,000 people said they hate setting their alarm. Let's confirm, are there any other roles besides discoverers and justifiers? And what are people thinking in terms of metadata? I think these would be some good research goals for your research repository project. I think that would... Look, that'll do for today. It's been a while. Yeah, cool stuff. Thanks for watching. If you watched all of this, you are amazing. If you didn't, hopefully you checked out whatever little report I'm going to create from this and put online, like maybe a PDF or something, I don't know. I'll work it out. And if you want to hire me to help you create your research repository, or if you want to invest in QualSpotter, hey, maybe. Give me a buzz, paulk@smallstudio.com.au. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.